Richard Skipper celebrates. Every show is a celebration. Each show, Richard delivers the artists you love, showcasing what makes them unique. Never gossipy. The antidote to a sometimes hectic world. Now, here's your host, Richard Skipper.
Happy Monday, everyone, and welcome to the latest edition of Richard Skipper Celebrates. This is the show in which I celebrate artists and their body of worth, what they bring to the table, what makes them tick, what makes them special and a standout. And I am so excited about today's guest, Valerie Smaldone. I have been a fan of hers for years. She's on the radio. I was lucky enough to be interviewed by her a few weeks ago. And at one point in the interview, I said, you should come on my show. And she said to me, I thought you'd never ask. And here she is.
Yay!
I am so excited that you're here. You normally are in the driver's seat, but tonight I'm driving. I've got the keys, and we're going to learn a lot about you, I hope, in the next hour. But before we start, I want to remind everyone, because Valerie and I are both New Yorkers, we're here in New York, that it's been 256 days since our theaters shut down. And it's not just the theaters, it's the businesses in the theater district. It's the people who work in the box office. It's the stagehands. Everything came to a screeching halt. But as I always say, the ghost lights burn brightly, and they burn within each and every one of our hearts. And Valerie, I know, based on my research and based on the work that she does, has a great love of this industry. And so I'm thrilled that she's here today. And before we begin, I want to ask you, how are you doing really in the midst of this crazy world we find ourselves in?
Wow. Thanks, Richard. And thank you for having me on your program. And I feel like I did steamroll my way into this because
I said no when you said yes.
I'm coming. But a great question, and one that I often ask the people, especially people in the theater and restaurant industry that I speak to. I am observing. I feel like I'm an observer. I started in this world as a journalist, and I feel like I sometimes just step back to watch where we are today. But I believe that we are in a very, very unique time in history. We're living history as it's unfolding, and that although our free will has been taken away, which is how I kind of position all of this in the pandemic, our free will has been taken away. There are many opportunities that are there and available to us. So I try to keep a very positive outcome. I did lose my mother during this time, and it was horrendous. And I know so many people who have lost loved ones. Mm-hmm. But I also feel that this is a time for us to assess where we are in the world and to create the relationships that are most meaningful to us. And I think that we have to look at it in that manner to survive this.
I think of this as a pause. I think it's a pause for us to take advantage of this time, to think about what we had, what we have, and what we desire in our lives. And it's funny, I was listening yesterday to a minister friend of mine, and he said, before this, everyone was complaining about the time that they had to spend with their families over the holidays. And now this year that they can't spend time with their families, they're complaining about that. We actually live in a nation of complainers.
That's true.
But I want to go back. Early March, I was rehearsing to do a show and getting ready. And then all of a sudden, everything shut down. So March 12th for me is that dividing factor. What did your calendar look like on March 11th?
Oh, wow. So first of all, lots of theater. I was so excited. The next week I was going to see Company and several other shows, right? I probably would have seen you there. So excited. Lots of dinner engagements. But in terms of work, I have as a voice of God, which is simply, it's not in any way biblical. It's simply a position at a live event where you are the disembodied voice that announces people on stage. I had 11 or 15 jobs, I think 15 jobs lined up between spring and fall, which are my busiest times. And literally as this news came out, they just started to drop off one by one by one, and all my jobs were gone. But beside that, it was really the busyness of life. I was supposed to travel to Portugal to host an event. Many of my hosting jobs, as well as Voice of God jobs, were gone. And so we are walking around completely disenfranchised, with not knowing how do we move forward. Every appointment everybody had was over. So it's a very unique situation and an interesting experience, if nothing more, than to see how do you react as a human being to this tremendous challenge.
Now, I may be giving away a little bit too much, and if I am, you can stop me. But I know you're still on the radio, and you have this incredible platform, Bagels and Broadway. I'm thrilled that I was on it a couple of weeks ago, and I do listen on Sunday afternoons through my device. I don't want to mention her name, otherwise she'll go off. Yes, she's sitting here listening to me. But are you still going into the studio, or are you doing everything from home?
I have not been in a studio ever. Prior to the pandemic, I did produce everything at home anyway. And in fact, all of my voice work, 90% is done at home. There's no need to go anywhere any longer. We all have our own studios and our own editing software and our own ring lights for the on-camera stuff. And although I really would like a professional lighting person, quite honestly, because without lighting people are the best people. They make everybody look good. Lighting, hair, and makeup, without that, we're lost. But well,
I'm going to make a suggestion to you. I can do it on air or afterwards. I'll give him a plug. Matt Berman. If you know Matt, he does a lot of the Broadway shows. He's great, and he's been helping everybody with their online lighting and everything. He helped me with mine, so I love him. I think he's great.
Perfect. So yeah, I have been recording at home and producing my show anyway. So it didn't affect me in that way at all. In fact, more of my guests were now available to be on the show because they were available.
And I have to say this, you have one of the, and I'm not being sexist, but you have one of the sexiest voices on radio and in broadcasting. When I first came to New York, one of the first voices I heard was Alison Steele, who also was late at night on WNEW radio. And I used to listen to her spin the records, and I would just lull off to sleep and everything. Was this voice always been there, or did you train for this voice? How did that begin for you?
I've never trained in my life. And that's very ironic because I do train and coach people. And I tell them you need to be trained and coached. But it's a different world now than when I started in voiceover and radio. But I literally was trained, if you will, as a novice. I walked into WFUV's radio station when I was day one at Fordham University at age 17. I walked into this 50,000 watt radio station and I just said, how does this work? And it was the upper class people training or giving whatever the rules and regulations you had to learn about broadcasting to the younger people. And I applied for the announcer's workshop, and I got into the announcer's workshop, and there I stayed, and here I am.
So I want to back up before we get to Fordham. You are a Bronx girl, as our mutual friend Joe Brancato says, the only borough with a "the" in front of it.
True.
So you grew up, were your parents in the arts? What did your parents do? Were you exposed to the arts growing up? Of course, you had the luxury of having the close proximity to New York City, Manhattan. But did you come into Manhattan to see shows?
Yes, my parents made it a commitment. We didn't travel. We didn't really go on vacation. What we did was we were exposed to all the arts. My father was a photographer and a tremendous musician. My grandfather was a musician. So we went to opera, ballet, theater, the best restaurants. They exposed us to the culture of New York, and I will never forget that. They opened my eyes to everything that I love. And my father, being sort of in the entertainment business because he shot a lot of models and actresses and actors. He had a studio on Lexington Avenue, was an artist. My mom spoke 4 languages, and taught at Jamaica High School. She taught French mainly, and Spanish, and a little Italian. So we were in a very broad background. My mother had, and I don't, you know how old I am, Richard, but do I have to say?
No.
No, okay.
You're ageless.
Okay, so
everyone's the same age, whether you like it or not. Everyone was born in 1961.
Everybody was?
Yes, that was the year I was born.
Okay, that's a good year. That's a good year. Good year.
Okay.
But we had in our Bronx house, we had my mother's friends from every background you can imagine, every color, every sexual persuasion, many, many years ago. So we were very, very open to culture and different types of individuals. It was a wonderful upbringing, and I credit them for the love that I have now.
And brothers and sisters?
I have a sister. My sister is a physician. She was an oncologist, and then she went over to the pharmaceutical side and became senior vice president of Bristol Myers Squibb. She was in research, and my sister was working on the early AIDS drugs. And so here it was this DJ, that's me, and this brilliant Yale-educated doctor in my house. So
that's amazing. I love it.
Yeah, it was very interesting growing up, for sure.
Well, I want to go back to your 5-year-old self, and I want to know what kind of music you were listening to in your house. What, as you've already mentioned, your father, with his profession, you were exposed to all of this. But what were you gravitating towards?
I was a weird child, and I became a weird adult. Unusual, let's put it that way. Quirky. I loved music from the 1920s and 30s and 40s. And I really didn't listen to top 40 radio. It wasn't my thing. We had French music on the hi-fi. Charles Aznavour, Yves Montand, Franco Nero, the Italians, and all these other people from the Italian culture. So we had French, Italian, opera. I gravitated towards the Great American Songbook, and even sooner, earlier in the 20s and 30s, Russ Columbo. No idea why, but I love that music. I love the music of that era, and I gravitated towards that on the radio. WEVD was playing that music back then. So that's what I listened to. Strange, right?
Well, not exactly, because I was growing up in South Carolina on a tobacco farm, listening to the same music. You mentioned Franco Nero. Today's his birthday. Interesting. You mentioned that.
Weird. Okay.
Yes. I just happened to have read that earlier today. These things pop up in my head. Now, I want to talk about your exposure to the arts in school. Arts in education is a platform that I'm very compassionate about. What kind of exposure did you have growing up before you went on to college?
I have seminal moments in my life that I recall very, very greatly. And I was a completely Bronx public school educated kid. I did not go to any private or any Catholic schools. It was all public education. And I had a very good education. And there was a program from Lincoln Center where a group of actors came to my junior high school called the Michelangelo School, IS 144, and they came to perform in our auditorium. That was one of the moments where I started to just follow them around, and I wanted to talk to them, and I wanted to understand what does this mean? You can do this? What is this? Now, that was a moment of great clarity for me. Just like when my parents brought me to my first Broadway show, I can't remember if it was, I'm dating myself, but it was original cast of either Oliver or Man of La Mancha, probably Oliver and then Man of La Mancha. And that was Broadway and smitten. But if I can just jump ahead to the moment, and this is not so much arts in the schools, but my mother, who was a teacher, bringing me to educational circumstances. May I?
Oh, absolutely.
I can't tell you what summer it was, but Herbie the Love Bug, the Disney movie, was out. And I wanted to see Herbie the Love Bug very badly. My mother had a different idea. She said, no, we're going up to Connecticut, Stratford, Connecticut, where there was the Shakespeare Theater up there. Beautiful Shakespeare Theater, replica of the Globe Theater. And she said, we're going to see a Shakespearean play, the last thing I wanted to see. And I went up with her, and Brian Bedford was in the play. I remember this. And it was a very hot summer day. And the air conditioning was broken. And here are these actors on stage wearing these heavy, heavy costumes and doing the whole thing. And my mother's sweating. And she turns to me at intermission. She said, "Valerie, you win. We're going to go. It's too hot." And I was just like this the whole way, the whole time watching the play. And I just turned to her and said, "Mommy, no, I want to stay." So these are the seminal moments that were so moving to me, between the public school system, bringing in those people, and my own mother bringing me to these educational opportunities. It was such a rich time for me and prompted me to be this quirky adult.
But was there a particular moment in your life that stands out above all others, in which you said, "This is the profession that I want to be in"?
I think it was with those people from Lincoln Center. I think because they were accessible. They were there. I could talk to them. I can ask them questions. They weren't just on stage. And I have photos of these people. I'll never forget the outfit the actor was wearing. I think I had a crush on him too. But I was just like, wow, you can do this for a living. And my whole idea was to one day be on Broadway as an actor.
Mm-hmm.
I got to Broadway. I did get to Broadway. I did do something on the stage, but it wasn't quite as an actor.
Well, but you got there. That's the bottom
line.
I did. Yesterday, I interviewed Adrienne Barbeau, and the same thing happened to her when someone said to her, "You should go to New York to pursue this as a career." And she says, "You can actually make a living doing this, going into this." When you went to college, what did you go to major in?
I majored in communications. The concentration was not radio, it was journalism.
Okay.
And minor in English. But Fordham University in the Bronx had a very old theater group called the Mimes and Mummers. So immediately, like I did with WFUV, I immediately, the very first opportunity, walked into the theater. How do I audition? What do I do? And I got into the first play that I auditioned for, which was Play It Again, Sam, Woody Allen. And I was a starring role. And so throughout my career at Fordham, I was radio and theater. And that has always been my dichotomy. As a Gemini, it so defines who I am. I can't do one thing. I had to do two things. It was theater and it was radio at Fordham.
And you have just brought them together throughout your entire career. When you were at Fordham and you started on the radio, tell us about your first night on the radio. Was it seamless? Were there mishaps, or did you start off on the right foot?
Well, there were many avenues to being on the radio. We had to do classical music because at the time WFUV was student run. Now it's an NPR station, but it was student run, and it was, and it still is, supported by listeners. And the listeners wanted classical music. And then they had specialty shows like an Irish show that did very well. The Irish show brought in a lot of money. And then a show that I ended up hosting called Showstoppers, which was Broadway music. But I had to learn the classical jargon and genre. And so that was learning the language, and I was very good with language because of my mom.
Excuse me for interrupting, but did you have a script that you worked with, or did you do the research yourself?
We had liner notes from albums. At the time they were albums, and we had format, like every radio station, there were formatted lines that you had to have. But in time, you develop your personality, and I don't know that I had much at the time. I can't imagine I had a personality on the air. But more for me, it was just being clean and making sure that I pronounced everything properly. This was, that was, under the direction of, the orchestra was, and it recorded in 19 whatever, and you just had the facts. But Richard, the very first time I was on the air, the mic was cracked, 17 years old, and I had to prove that I could do this. All I had to do was the legal ID at the top of the hour, and that's always the call letters in the city. So it was WFUV New York. And I practiced it and practiced it and practiced it. And I sat there with my little headphones on, and I sat in the corner, and the guy that was running the board, points to me, and I proudly say, WF New V, New York. And so my very first time on the radio, I screwed it up. Many more to come.
Well, I think that, we've all been there where you rehearse and rehearse and rehearse and rehearse, and you've got it perfectly. And then you walk out in front of the audience, and the first thing that comes out is a mistake.
Yes.
When and how did the interviewing start for you? Because you are brilliant at that.
Thank you, Richard. I mean, you have created an amazing avenue for yourself and marketplace, and I give you so much credit for what you're doing right now. And I love the idea of celebration, celebrating people.
Well, we talked about that before, and I want to
Yes.
talk about that later on in the program as well.
Yes, absolutely. Again, my parents have influenced me so much. My father was a photographer, as I mentioned, and he had many late night assignments, and he would come home and watch Johnny Carson. And he would pick me up if I was young, and he would put me, just to spend time with me, put me on the table as he was eating dinner, watching Johnny Carson, and I would sit there and watch Johnny Carson. And I watched Merv Griffin, and I watched Mike Douglas. We talked about this, right? Mm-hmm. And these were the people that just captivated me. I so enjoyed the idea of getting to know people and getting to really, as you said, to understand why they tick and how they get up in the morning, because everybody, Richard, has a story. Everybody. And whether you're interviewing a top celebrity or the person who cleans the streets, everybody has a compelling story, and it unites us in our humanity. And so I love to get the story from people. And I really was influenced by Johnny Carson because he was such a master at giving people the floor. And even with just a look, and of course it was on television, not radio, but giving a look was funny enough. He didn't even have to say anything. So he was a master. And one day, one of my many books that I have yet to write is Everything I Learned About Interviewing, I Learned from Johnny Carson. That's my title.
That's funny.
It's on the back burner.
I've got a book back here called Everything I Learned About Show Business, I Learned from Carol Channing.
The companion piece. We should work together.
We'll work together on this. I grew up with, for me, it was Merv Griffin. But what I loved about those shows was the fact that these guests would come on the show and they would sit there and they would talk. And many times they would come on when they didn't have a thing in the world to plug. But he liked them. And if he liked you, you would be brought back time and time again. And the fact that you got a chance to see these people, not just one time, but several times, even in a year, you'd see the same people over and over and over again. You would get to know who they were. And I'm sure that you'll agree with me. The one lesson that I've learned in this business, and you and I both have been very fortunate in the number of people that we've interviewed. You've gotten some of the Holy Grail interviews that I'd love to get. And I'd like to talk about some of those. But that people are people. People have the same hopes. They have the same fears. As my dear friend David Friedman says, we're all in this together. We're just not in the same boat. And that's, very important to me. So who was the first interview that you had?
Well, I'm going to jump ahead to WLTW because that was the bulk of my career, 24 years there. And I'm going to talk about celebrity, okay? Because this was Tony Bennett. And at the time, he was sort of in between being passé and just before being cool and hip again when his son reinvented him. And I went to his business apartment on 55th Street with an engineer, and he was lovely. This lovely guy, just so sweet. He had and he's a great painter. He's a great artist. And around the perimeter of his apartment were all these original paintings of Tony Bennett. And I would just walk around and say, Mr. Bennett, these paintings are amazing. And he said, take one, sweetheart. And I said, being brought up as a nice girl from the Bronx, oh no, Mr. Bennett, I couldn't possibly take one. Sweetheart, take a painting, take a painting. And I was like, oh no, I can't. I was frozen. And he's like, all right. And I thought, what? I didn't take a painting. I didn't take the painting.
Well, if I could turn back time.
So he was my first real serious interview. And from that experience, I introduced him on stage many, many, many times. And he became such a lovely, lovely human being. And so happy he's still working. He's still working.
Thank God. And do you have that painting? Did you ever get it?
No.
Well, we got to go in. But you mentioned you were at the radio station 24 years. What was the secret?
There was a consistency of sound. It was a tightly programmed station. Mm-hmm. It was not an offense. It was no offense. There was no way you can offend people. So everybody agreed in the office that this was a good station to listen to, because it was a lot of office listening was our bread and butter. Mm-hmm. I was on, Richard, between noon and 4, which was the best job in the world, noon to 4. We had 2.5 million listeners back then. Number 1 rated radio station, number 1 rated time slot, number 1 rated economic station. We brought in more money than anything else. So it was like the Yankees. It was like being in the Yankees for radio. It was a heritage radio station, and it was consistent. That's what it was.
And was there a particular time where you felt that you had succeeded at what you set out to do?
That's a really hard question for me to answer, because I never really set out to be in radio per se. I found it easy for me, and I did it, and it became something that I could do.
You're a 5-time Billboard Award winner, so congratulations on that.
Thank you.
So, I mean, you've set the bar at such a high level. Have you worked all hours of the spectrum in radio? And if so, do you have a particular favorite time that you prefer to be out there? When I first came to New York, there was no cable television. Mm-hmm. And I loved talk radio. And I would listen to these stations all night long. And I miss that. I mean, you don't really have a lot of those anymore. And I unfortunately fall asleep many nights listening to the news, which is not good.
Yeah, right. Absolutely. Well, I did work every shift. I did the overnight. I did holidays. I did morning drive, which is not my favorite. I am not a morning person. Getting up at 2 a.m. is not fun, especially in the winter. I've done afternoon drive. I love afternoon drive. That's a wonderful time, because it's 2 to 7. And so I can still get to my Broadway shows, and I can still have a night, and I can come in later in the morning. So I love afternoon drive. And the midday was not very, very nice. It worked with my lifestyle very well, because I was always working other jobs. Remember, Gemini can't do one thing. So I was doing television. I was voiceover, always lots of voiceover and television. And then I had my own production company and producing events. So having the midday was a very nice time for me. It worked very well with lifestyle. But morning drive, don't like it. Overnight's difficult, and you can't really have a life with overnights. Difficult.
Now, as I said at the beginning of the program, I was in the driver's seat, but that's not exactly true. You have put yourself in the driver's seat. It's not just that you show up and do the radio. You've created your own production company. You are an entrepreneur. How did that all come about? And what is it that you really love about being in that position for yourself personally? And I would like to also talk about some of the big changes that you've seen in the industry since you first started.
Okay, those are a lot of questions.
I know.
So what's the first one?
I want to go back to what was the first question? Getting out there and being an entrepreneur and creating your own production company and getting started there.
So in radio, especially the radio that I was doing, it was very formatted, and you execute somebody else's vision, which I am happy to do. I love to do it. Mm-hmm. But I never had the opportunity to really express myself in that manner. And I've also, Richard, back and forth, I have this sort of war of business and art. And before I went into radio, I was on track for being a publicist. I interned in publicity in a movie company in New York, and I was working as a publicist. And I had a time where I had both job opportunities on both sides, being a publicist and being a radio talent, same time. And I thought, let me try the radio, because I can always revert back to business and into publicity. And so that's the track I took. So I've kind of been at war with that. I wanted to own a stocking store when I was a kid. I was a very quirky child. So there was always this sense of business. And my dad was an entrepreneur. He had his own business. He didn't work for anybody else. So I grew up with that. I grew up with that experience. And I wanted to create content. That was my biggest thing, creating content, whether it is a live event that I host and produce, or a radio program, a podcast, a film, a play. I've done it all. I've done it all. I'm not saying all, like they were not all successful. I made tons of money on it. No, but I saw it through to completion. And this takes me, and I don't want to hijack the interview because I'll go the way where you want to go, but I do want to talk about.
Hijack the interview. Go with it.
I do want to talk about where I am today, literally today. And why don't you we'll get there.
No, I keep going. I love what you're saying here. When you were pitching these ideas in radio, because I don't really know that world that well, it was an easy thing to do?
Michael Riedel had the show before me on the radio station. And when Michael left, I went to the general manager and said, I need to do the show. I mean, who else would do the show? I need to do the show. You need me. And we created a business arrangement that worked. And I had to do a little bit, I had to go through some hoops to talk about, because everything comes down to sales. And everything comes down to what can you bring to the table? In every business, what can you bring to the table? And so we went through that, and I was able to do whatever required. And here we are, almost 3 years later. So it's not as easy as just I'm auditioning for a job. We created a business for me. Now, Michael's show was different from mine. But there was an interest and a niche in the station for a theatrical program, or about theater and Broadway. And let's not forget the fact that a lot of Broadway shows advertise. So that always is an opportunity, right? You always have to, art and commerce, as my dear friend Brenda Vaccaro says, art and commerce have to go together. Like she go like this, it has to go together. We have to, and it's true. You have to make sure that the art that you create, the content you build, is going to have an audience, is going to be an opportunity for sales and for sponsorship. It has to work together.
Now, the last question that I asked in that group of questions was the biggest changes that you've seen in the industry since you first started. And then I want to come up to what is happening now in your career. What changes do you really love? What changes do you not like? And what have you resisted the most in terms of the changes?
I don't resist change because I like to be ahead of the change. And that's why I left the radio station. The future that I saw back in, this was 2008, when the economy crashed, bad time to leave, Valerie. But what I saw was that technology and our mobile phones and how people were consuming radio was going to change. We were starting to see all the trends that people under 35 weren't listening to music radio. They were not listening to it. They were finding music different ways. And so I did not want to be a dinosaur. So I don't resist change. I really enjoy it, and I go with a wave. And I also believe technology drives society. Those people who resist technology are left behind, quite honestly. It's very simple. And it's the same thing as in my industry, in voiceover. If you're not willing to learn how to create an audio file and send it, you're not going to be competitive. You're not in the marketplace. So I don't resist change in that way. Possibly in my personal life, yes, but not in business. In business, I love change and I embrace it and I want to learn about it and I want to be ahead of the curve.
Wow,
what radio, I think, failed to do early on was to recognize that there was change going on and they had to have a more digital presence, an online presence. I was working with this major company building a Broadway network back in 2005 and 6. We were building a Broadway music network. Does that sound familiar? Like Sirius XM, right? And we got up to we did all the due diligence and they pulled the plug. They said they don't want to fund it. Of course they have it now. So I wanted to be ahead of the curve, and I wish I had that opportunity. So radio to me was a little behind the party. They didn't join the party, and they didn't look at what could be moving forward. And I wanted to be a forward thinker, not stagnant or back. That's not what I wanted to do. What I love that they have done is that now they have embraced it, and now all the personalities must be visible on the different platforms and be more of a human being rather than a talking head on the radio. So now it's come there, and it's all good in that sense. And it's a much more casual medium than it used to be. It's far more casual. The pandemic also, getting back to how things have changed, has created the need for people to work from their homes on Zoom, and the audio may not be so great any longer, and the video may not be so great, but it's more about the content and not so much about the technology. I'm sure we'll swing back once things get back to normal-ish, but for now, it's very forgiving. It's a very forgiving medium on both levels.
Now, before we move on, have you embraced social media? Great. Yes, always have, early on, early adapter. The problem with social media, anybody can tell you, is it's extremely time consuming to do it right, and you have to do it constantly. So just like I told you in the email that I sent you the other day, oh, Richard, my website is not really up to date. It's missing some things, because that takes time to do it. And although I may consult with a brand or an individual, that all of that has to be sewn up. I'm like a shoe man who doesn't have nice shoes. You have to find the time to do it. And it's very time consuming, but necessary. You have to have that footprint online. Well, let's talk about what's going on in your life now. In addition to, we've talked about the pandemic and how we're all getting through this, but how are you remaining creative during this time frame?
In addition to Beagles and Broadway, which is a great platform for me to give people the opportunity to say where they are in the world and what they're doing, and all the resilience that we've seen from our community, which is amazing, and also to help support the restaurant industry, which is so important to New York and elsewhere. I recently joined a company, and it literally fell into my lap. I didn't look for it. I didn't know about it. But because I did an interview with the founders of this company, we created a relationship. And about 2 months later, they invited me to join the company. And I am executive vice president of a production company. And the company has 3 elements to it. It has a publishing company, so we have intellectual property and stories. We have a podcasting company and create audio drama, and have 3 or 4 series that have been launched. This is before I came on board. And now, and most important, where I am right now is where we filmed an adaptation of one of our podcasts called Closing the Distance, and it's in market for sale. And very exciting, a new series called COVID America, the series. Our team went out to 8 states and shot how Americans have responded to the pandemic. Wow. No politics. We don't care. We're not interested in politics. No spin. Just the real truth of how Americans have responded and how they're resilient or not. And we went to cities like New Orleans and to Nashville and to Jackson, Mississippi. And the team came back at the, I'm going to say October, the end of October. They came back, and now we're in edits and we're in marketplace to sell this. And I'm a producer on the series. So how the pandemic affected me was, I would not have had this opportunity, because if Closing the Distance wasn't out there, which is about the pandemic, it's audio drama about the pandemic, they wouldn't have been on my program and I wouldn't have met them. So here we are with this crazy opportunity that came my way, and always wanting to create content. I was given this opportunity and I said, well, you've always wanted to be a producer, like real-time producer, and this is your opportunity. So don't say no. Don't say no. Even though you're saying, I don't know what I'm doing, you'll learn. You'll learn. And you know what? I have years of experience doing this. I have years of experience. Just because I haven't done this particular area doesn't mean I don't know what I'm doing. And I think all of us are so scared to take that step a little bit out of the comfort zone that your first inclination is no. But I say you should try and say yes. Say
Absolutely.
yes.
I think now is the time to step out of the comfort zone. I mean, all of us have been forced out of our comfort zones. And if this is not the time, then when is?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
I want to ask you a question about this series. And I don't want to get political at all, and I'm not going to go there. But so many people have made the COVID issue a political issue. How are you able to dig down deep on the other side of the political side of this?
In terms of the interviews that we did?
Yes.
Well, everybody has a real life story to tell. And what we did was we did an ask on social media, and we put out and particularly targeted the cities we were going to, submissions. And so the submissions came in, whether it was a video or it was just a text on Facebook. The submissions came in, and I went through. I was really tasked with this, going through all the submissions and seeing who had the most heartwarming story or the most difficult story or whatever it was. We were able to sort of find a matrix of people that were willing to share their stories. And we put out no politics, no spin. We believe that, and I'm sure you too, Richard, that during the time, you see sound bites on news briefs and you get a snippet of a story about healthcare workers or frontline workers. But what's the real depth behind those people? We're not going there. We're not understanding that. So the director and producer of the series was in the trenches asking the questions. So much so that I just spoke to him today. He's still affected by what he saw and heard, and how this country is so wounded and so limping along. There are a lot of people in trouble in many ways, not only economically, but emotionally in trouble. And so it's a worldwide circumstance that we're taking and looking at our country, our nation, and saying, tell us about this. Just like you said to me, how are you doing? Mm-hmm. How are you doing? And not railing about the left or the right or the in-between. This is a true story. It's a life-changing pandemic that comes along once in 100 years, and we happen to be the lucky ones at this time that are dealing with it. So I think that when you position it that way and you say, I'm not interested in who you're voting for, because this is right before the election, interested to know how this affected you, your family, your soul, your heart. What are your next steps? What are your plans? And when somebody asks that question as simple and basic as that, people tell their story. They want to tell their story. Don't you think?
Absolutely. And that brings me to another topic that I want to share with you, and that you and I share in common. And one of the things that I love about you is that you are always celebrating the people that you interview. And neither one of us are interested in what they call the gotcha questions, and those moments that are going to put the people that we're interviewing in an uncomfortable position. You talk about being a quirky kid. I'm a quirky kid. I'm not interested in a person's private life. I'm interested in what makes them tick. And where did that come from for you in terms of also celebrating the people that you've had face to face and now this way?
That's a great question. And if I'm really honest, the first thing that comes to mind is I don't know that I felt heard growing up. And because I had such a spectacular sister, brilliant, not only in school, but she was a fine artist, and I couldn't do that. I felt perhaps less than, and there was nothing I could do that would be as interesting. So perhaps, I'm being super honest when you ask that question, that's what comes to mind, that maybe I didn't feel that anybody ever really asked me that question. Mm-hmm. So maybe I'm interested because I wasn't asked the question.
Now, I want to ask you a few questions about some of the interviews you've done. And who was the holy grail interview that you always want to interview, other than myself, of course, that you got a chance to interview, that you dreamed of interviewing, and you got that interview. And did that person live up to that mystical, pedestal that we end up putting these celebrities on?
I've interviewed so many major celebrities, and I think I might have shared with you that celebrity does not interest me. I'm interested in people's work or their who they are. And I have to go back years ago when I was, I don't know, whatever age I was very into, at the time, Kenny Loggins, the singer-songwriter. Kenny Loggins, known for Loggins and Messina, and then he went out on his own. And I was going through a particularly hard time, emotionally hard time, breakup, blah, blah, blah. And I would listen to his albums and I'd read his books, and I would just say, if only I could meet Kenny Loggins one day. And sure enough, I had the opportunity to meet Kenny Loggins and be knee to knee in a small studio with him. And here's where it went crazy. So I have I have the opportunity to interview him. He calls the radio station after our interview to say, who is that girl? Who is she? She was a really good interview. I would like her to interview me for something else, or I want to be in touch with her. And we became friends. We became friends. And then I spent some time with him when he was in New York, and got to know him, and he was lovely. And I went to California and I met up with him and his wife at the time, and he was lovely. And so that was my wow. Not only did I get to interview him, but I got to have a relationship or a friendship with him. The same thing happened with Rod Stewart. He and I did not get along the first time I met. He was not nice to me because I started out, and I learned this doing this, Richard. The very first question I asked him had nothing to do with his album, which he was promoting. I asked him about his interest in football, soccer. In the UK, he owned a team. And so I said, so Rod, tell me, you like soccer? And he turned to me, he said, that has nothing to do with why I'm here. And I'm like, oh my God, what? All right, so come back from that. The next time I met him, he was darling. He was adorable, and he asked me to come and interview him for an A&E special. He invited me to all kinds of events. He just had a bad day that first time. You know, I also realized people are human, and that, you know, we all have our thing, and sometimes it's not a great day. So the same thing happened with him, where he wanted to know who I was. Can she interview me for something else? So that really gave me a great deal of confidence that I was doing something right, even though I screwed up with him the first time.
But there was the second chance.
Yes, there was.
And that's the best part of that. So with where you are right now, what's on the bucket list that you haven't done that you've always dreamed of doing?
I would love, in the voice world, I would love a couple of things. One is I really would like to be more in a male-dominated arena. Now, women have absolutely infiltrated sports as newscasters and sportscasters, but I'd like to be more involved with promos for football and baseball and basketball. I think I have the proper voice for that. I've worked with football before. I'd like to get back into male-dominated voice work. I'd love to be a character in animation. I'd love to do that. I've dabbled with animation, but I haven't had a real experience yet, like serious animation experience. And, you know, I keep saying I have all these books that I have these wonderful titles that I want to write my books and get my story out there too. I wonder if, you know, being an interviewer, I always think the other person's far more interesting than I am. I wonder if there would be interest in that. I don't know. You know, I'd hate to go through that and then nobody buys it.
Yeah. I'm going to say yes. Absolutely.
Okay. All right, you'll buy it. I know that's one one sale.
And I'll keep pushing it out there. Is there a particular person that's on your Holy Grail list that you'd like to interview? And we're not just talking celebrity, but who is out there that you would like to sit down and chat with?
The person I really wanted to interview is dead, unfortunately. So that was Frank Sinatra. I really would have loved to interview Frank Sinatra and the whole Rat Pack. That would have been awesome. This is going to sound crazy, but I really would like a crack at Donald Trump. I just want to understand the guy. I want to know what the hell is going on in that head. I mean, I just want to know.
I've got my theories.
Yes, me too. Me too. But he's such an unusual human being that it's a challenge. Now, there are wonderful interviewers who've gone before me that have tried to interview him and get to the nut of it, and it hasn't worked.
Well, I was going to ask you, I mean, you've seen many interviews over the years. I did 2 long-running shows at Trump's Taj Mahal in Atlantic City in the 90s. And I've met him one-on-one. Very different man than who he is now.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I met him too. And he was very nice to me. He was very complimentary. But yes, he's a different human being at this point. So that just came to mind because he's in the news, obviously, these days.
Mm-hmm. But the question I was going to ask is, do you think that anyone has actually, honest to God, gotten a good interview with him?
No. Because, I mean, there's an agenda too, and I don't want the agenda. I just want to have that one-on-one as a human being and not ask about politics or any of that. I just want to know about him and how he feels about his family and his children and talk about that, because it's such a conundrum to try and understand this person. I would like to find out more. It's not about the politics. It's more about what's behind that. That would be a challenge. It's just a challenge. That's all it is. I look at it that way. But if we were to talk about celebrity in today's world, I have a hard time with anybody. I'm not sure I know of anybody that is coming to mind, to be honest with you, other than the people who are no longer here, which I can't do.
Wow.
Clearly.
Michael Musto wrote a very interesting article recently, which I will send to you if you're interested, about the gossip columns and the fact that was the role that he came up in. And again, with all due respect to Michael, that's not really the world that you and I are in. But he says that he feels that Trump has really destroyed the gossip column because he now owns and manipulates the entire news cycle.
Yes, that's very true. That's a very good observation, actually. That's true.
And it's very interesting looking at things through those eyes. But do you think that the media, being in this profession, has lost control of being able to tell his story without a bias, regardless of what side you're on?
I think so. And I think that our media, too, has been diluted tremendously. Back in the day when we had the Walter Cronkites and the Huntley and Brinkley report, these were true journalists. Journalism has taken a huge hit. And it's because of big business. It's because of the need for revenue and to keep people scared and watching and listening. And there's a whole fear factor involved with all of this as well. So I'm sad about it, and I hope it will come back, and I hope that we'll have something to be proud of again. And there are great journalists out there, don't get me wrong. There's some wonderful people, but they have to answer to networks. And networks, listen, if you saw Bryan Cranston, the network on Broadway, I mean, that wasn't so far off from where we are. It's not that crazy, that show, which was based on the movie.
Well, I grew up at an era where you had 3 networks, ABC, CBS, and NBC. We didn't even have PBS in South Carolina.
Wow.
And I talk about those 3 networks because they went from 6 or 7 in the morning until 1 a.m. And then you heard the national anthem and the test pattern for the night period. And I have a very nostalgic feel for that era because all of those networks were vying for the largest demographic that they could get. And therefore, I grew up watching the stars from my parents' generation, sharing a stage with those from my grandparents' generation, and even my own generation. I remember, believe it or not, Donnie and Marie Osmond's first variety show. And their guests, believe it or not, were Ray Bolger and Kate Smith.
Mm. Wow. Interesting.
They didn't go after, the Jackson 5 or the Osmond brothers. They could have easily had. They went for those older generations. And I think that today's world is missing out on that.
Yeah. It's a different era, a different time, and we can't really recapture what was because it was simple, and we have now so much competition in media, and the media has been democratized as well because there are bloggers and podcasters and webisodes and all of this content that's out there. So it's a very different time. But what bothers me the most is that there is this, as you said, the gotcha mentality, and that social media has bred that, unfortunately.
Absolutely. Well, guess what, Valerie? We've reached the end of our show.
No. By the way,
you said to me, what are we going to have to talk about for an hour? I could go on for days and days and days. I hope that when your show launches that you'll come back and that we'll talk about it and we'll get it out there. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today. If you enjoyed the show, and I hope you did, please go to my website and sign my guest book, richardskipper.com, with your thoughts about the show, because that helps to boost me in other markets. I also end every show by telling everyone to go out and do something nice for somebody else without expecting anything in return. Many of you are watching this right now on Facebook, so you're on Facebook. Go to your Facebook page, look at your friends list, and go to the 5th friend and reach out and call them. Let them know. You do the same thing, Valerie. Call them. Let them know what they mean to you. Not a text, not an email, but an actual phone call. Reach out to everyone. This is Thanksgiving week as we do this live. So I'm grateful for Valerie spending an hour with me. I'm grateful for all of you who tuned in. And Valerie, before we sign off, I'm going to give you the last word. Anything you want to say about anything that we talked about today, anything that you wish that we had talked about that we didn't cover, or just any general message that you want to put out to all my listeners today. And once again, thank you for being here.
Oh, you're very sweet, and some great words and great motivation. I was holding up this shirt because I want you to know I wanted to be snazzy for you. So I thought I'd do a little Liza outfit and these sparkly earrings. And I just want you to know I don't normally dress like this at home. I'm putting on my hoodie and making dinner as soon as I'm done.
Me too.
Richard, I just want to thank you. And I think we need more people like you in the world who are kind and really have such great humanity in mind. Your humanity is beautiful. I want to wish you and yours a very happy and healthy Thanksgiving. And to everybody also, please stay safe. Stay and hang on there. Just hang on. We're going to get through this together. It'll be okay.
And Sunday afternoon at 2:00.
Oh, yes. Bagels and Broadway radio show. That's right. Thank you for the plug.
Yes.
Appreciate it, Richard. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a great day, everyone, and make it an even greater tomorrow. Thank you.